last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Dark Matters Radio. Dark Matters Radio, of course, is brought to you courtesy of KGRA, your contact point to all those stranger dark corners. And we got a heck of a show tonight, bringing him back once again because, well, my guest and I go back a very long way, and he has been, as you're going to hear tonight, in the middle of a bunch of fascinating stuff, literally going back to the 1980s, and of course, none other than Mr. Tracy Torme. Tracy, hey, it is a distinct pleasure to have you back. How have you been, my friend?
Well, thank you, Don. It's always my pleasure to appear on your show, say hello to your wonderful listeners, and I've been doing just great, buddy. How about you?
Well, I'll tell you, today and yesterday, here it is, beginning of October, right? Today, as we do this show, out here in sunny Southern California, it's October the 2nd. I think that's right. Today's the 2nd, right? If it's not, it ought to be.
That's a tricky question for me.
Yeah, but at any rate, this afternoon by noon, it was pumping out 100 degrees here, and yeah. I checked with the Weather Service. It was supposed to hit a high of 104 or maybe even more, and my Lord, it's October, so you know. Of course, this is nothing really strange. It's like this usually until November, December before it really starts to cool down a little bit. But other than that, Tracy, we've been doing just fine. Of course, we got, I'm a director with our local association up here in the canyon where I live. And we had our monthly meeting last night. And we have a park up here that when my wife Vicki and I first moved up here, that's where we went to vote every year. And then somebody changed the deal and they stopped voting over there and decided they were going to send out absentee ballots to everybody. So the last number of years we've been voting via absentee ballot, but because of the COVID virus, the COVID-19 virus, they decided they're going to have a flex polling place. So the first question I ask, what the hell is a flex polling place? And it appears that maybe, now nothing is set in concrete, they might bring this thing up there where there'll be like a 4-hour window. Everybody can run their ballots over there or take a ballot over there. So I just love it when a plan comes together, buddy, you know?
Oh, yeah. Boy, this election is going to be something, man. You know, I'm not even going to get into my worries about what's going to happen after the election.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really hope there's still a country left.
Yeah, well, it's been a little shaky for sure. But hey, since you've been on the last time, a lot of stuff has been happening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Tracy and I have talked quite a bit the last few days, and he was telling me about some individuals that he recently had an opportunity to meet with. And of course, everybody should know that Tracy and his forays into the wonderful world of UAPs, UFOs, depending upon where you're coming from, one of those strange objects that fly in the sky go back a long, long way. And some of the people that Tracy has known very well include people like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Jacques Vallée, and I'm not gonna step on his toes and tell you who he's recently been in touch with, but I'm gonna let Tracy do that. Tracy, actually, going back to all the days of J. Allen Hynek, how in the world did you happen to pop across him?
Well, that's a great question. He's sort of, in some circles, he's actually a little bit forgotten now. People don't really, he's been dead for quite a while, and a lot of people have kind of not realized how much he was at the center of all of this stuff. But the way I met him, Don, was my friend Bud Hopkins, who's a name that I know you know well. He had a beautiful apartment home in Greenwich Village in New York.
Well, a lot of people don't realize he was an internationally renowned artist.
Absolutely. And his home was amazing because he had his own art studio right in that home. And he had a party. I wish I knew what the occasion was. I don't remember. And he had a party, and there were, at least 40 or 50 people sitting around, listening to music, having a cocktail here and there. And I look over and I see this guy sitting on the couch with a pipe in his mouth and a very prominent little sort of goatee-like beard. And I immediately knew who it was. And I said, oh, I got to take advantage of this. And it was J. Allen Hynek. And so I introduced myself, and I sat next to him on the couch, and we really hit it off. I think he liked me because he found out that I really knew the subject, and I started asking him some questions that I think impressed him that I did at least know the subject. And so he and I must have sat on that couch for a few hours that night, and I got to ask him a million things. And after that night, I would say that we had become friends. I met his wife, Mimi, too. And so he and I stayed in touch over the years. And I found him to have a really, great, very sharp sense of humor, which I really liked. And he really opened up to me in ways that were, I was grateful for as time went on. I got to know his son, Joel, who ironically became a pretty big deal in Hollywood. He's a special effects guy. I think he even won an Oscar at one point. So I knew the whole family. And the last time I spoke to him, I was at Saturday Night Live as a writer, and one of the PAs came in to knock on my door and came in and said, Tracy, there's some guy named Allen Hynek on the phone for you. And I remember being startled because I didn't even know that he knew I was at Saturday Night Live, and it had to take a little effort to have found me that day. And I picked up the phone and I said, Alan, what's going on? And I could just hear from the connection on the phone line that he was somewhere way probably out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember him saying to me, well, Tracy, I'm in a town called Reserve, New Mexico. And I said, I'd never heard of that place. And I said, Alan, what the hell are you doing there? He said, well, I'm into a very interesting case. And I said, okay. And we spoke for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes. And then I found out very shortly after that he had a brain hemorrhage and died.
Oh,
and
my God. Really? That was about what, 86?
I'm not sure of the years, but it was very, I was very shaken up by it because we had just had this really nice conversation. And then, Donna, you and I have talked about this hideous show, Project Blue Book, which
right.
I had really high hopes for that show. And amazingly, they turned Alan Hynek into a James Bond action figure. in the first few episodes, he's in a car chase. He's karate chopping someone to escape. People are shooting at him. I was thinking, oh my God, does Hollywood have no shame? And then it got worse because they turned Mimi Hynek, this very nice, prim, proper little lady that I knew, into a lesbian. She has a big lesbian affair, or a series of them, on that show. Anyway, I'm bringing all this up because Alan was an amazing guy, and I knew that, for those in your audience that don't know, he was a Ohio State astronomy professor. And the Air Force, when they were first looking into UFOs, they wanted a scientific voice to basically take the lead and explain all these stupid UFO cases away. So Alan, was the one that did that. Whenever a case came up, Don, as you well know, he would be the guy taken to the scene. He'd do a minimal amount of investigation, and then it was up to him, and he was under real pressure. It was up to him to come forward and say, scientifically, here's what that was. Nothing, beyond that. So Alan was the guy who had the job of explaining these things away. And he told me that when he first got involved, he thought it was going to be an easy job because he didn't believe at all that these things could be real. And it would just be a matter of getting to the bottom of it and saying, oh, well, that was just the planet Venus or whatever. And he told me that he became increasingly uncomfortable with doing that because he felt sometimes he was more, motivated by pleasing the Air Force and saying what the explanation was. And he was beginning to get a bit worried that he was overlooking, the reality of what these incidents were.
Well, during that period of time, Tracy, there were people like Major Donald Kehoe, who was heading up NICAP, and other notable, researchers, Ivan Sanderson, Richard Hall, just a whole slew of them. And I researched and studied that period from the mid-50s through the early 70s intensely. And the Air Force often came across as a very clumsy bully, coming up with explanations of sightings of things as recounted by airline pilots, even military pilots, police officers on the ground, and giving totally asinine explanations like, well, it had to be the planet Venus, when Venus was actually on the other side of planet Earth, things that were easily explained away. But I got to be honest, I always had a bit of resentment about Hynek until he finally severed the tie with the Air Force, that he was way too timid. And people like Kehoe and McDonald, Dr. James McDonald, McDonald excoriated Hynek on a number of occasions.
Yes, and he was well aware that in those years he was a pariah to a lot of people. I mean, the pro-UFO people, he was the number one enemy. They couldn't stand him. And if anyone got to know him, he was actually a very, very nice, gentle man with a great sense of humor. And he was between a rock and a hard place in those days. He actually talked to me about how at the time Blue Book closed down, it admitted to 701 cases that were totally unexplained. But the number was actually a lot larger, because he told me when they would make a case for, oh, well, that light was just the planet Jupiter. It was very bright that night. And then they would find out from an astronomer, some other astronomer, well, Jupiter was not actually on this side of the Earth that night, just like what you just said, Don. And they would then not change the case from explained to unexplained. So there were a number of cases that had totally faulty explanations, but the Air Force did not want to make the number larger, so they wouldn't admit to it. And so, you know, I had a great deal of empathy for him once I got to know him, because he felt badly about some of the explanations he put forward when he was a bit, you know, younger. Now, the interesting thing is, for those in your audience that know what the Socorro, New Mexico case was, or it's known as the Zamora case, for those of you guys out there that don't know this, it was a policeman that had a strange encounter in the New Mexico desert. I think it was 1964, Don.
Right,
and,
right, 64.
And he was very disturbed by this case. And I would say, from what he told me, this was the case that finally made him decide to pivot. And instead of being the leader of the anti-UFO movement, he suddenly became a pro-UFO guy. And to the point where he ended up coining the phrase close encounters of the first, second, third, and fourth kind. He worked very closely with Spielberg on the movie. He actually has a pretty prominent cameo in the movie, where when the saucers all start to land, the camera pans to him coming through the crowd, smoking his pipe, as always, and kind of nodding his head at what he sees.
Well, there's one,
Spielberg.
Tracy, there's one case that we cannot dismiss. We've got to at least mention it. And it's the case of the 1966 Hillsdale College case. And the possible explanation that Hynek came up with that literally convulsed the entire nation into laughter.
Yeah, I spoke to him about that. It's interesting what he said. There were a flock of sightings in Michigan at that time, and Hillsdale College was kind of the center of some of these sightings that happened all around there. And Hynek said there was like a frenzy in Michigan to explain these things away, or at least come forward with something. And the Air Force was under tremendous pressure. So they stuck Allen out at a press conference. And it was kind of a overwhelming press conference. And they were all asking Dr. Hynek, what's your explanation for these things, and he really didn't have one at that time. And he told me he had not had a chance to even study the cases thoroughly. So he was completely flat-footed. But they kept pushing him for an explanation, and he said something about, well, the college campus is, in a marshy area, and it actually could be swamp gas that's rising into the air. He had no idea that the press would run with that so much, but they did, and they made it sort of became the centerpiece of how absurd the Air Force's explanations were, and he was very embarrassed by it because he became known by it. It pretty much haunted him, to his later years that he had said that. It became sort of a phrase that was used to show how stupid some of these explanations were. And he felt badly about it, and you're right, Don. That was probably one of the things that started to turn him around, too. But the Socorro case in '64 really permanently, I would say, turned him around. And over the next, how many years was it? 15 years or whatever. He did a lot of things to help in the study of UFOs.
Well, what is your take on his association with Jacques Vallée?
Well, Jacques Vallée was a young astrophysicist, I guess, from France that had come to America. I think that he started an association with Northwestern University. I think that's where Alan met him. And Alan was very impressed with his mind. And Jacques had a lot of very revolutionary theories on UFOs. And they became an interesting pair. I mean, their ages were very different, and they came from different parts of the world. But I think they formed a very effective team and started looking into the subject together. I got to know Jacques very well later on. I wrote a novel with him, believe it or not, and we became good friends, and he used to speak of Hynek with great reverence. And I'm just really glad that Alan saw the light. And like I said, he did a pivot, and he really did. I mean, it's just funny how at one point his image of the way he looked, he was like a dartboard for anyone that was pro-UFO. And then later on, he showed a lot of courage and basically admitted that he'd been wrong and that this was a subject that needed great scientific attention. And he really strove to get that attention formulated in his later years. And so I'm really glad that I did get to know him, the real him.
Yes, unfortunately, Dr. Hynek passed on before I really entered the field. I never had an opportunity to meet him, which I've always regretted, along with I never had the opportunity to meet Major Donald Keyhoe, whom I have the utmost respect for. I think Keyhoe, when it came to this topic, was a genuine trailblazer and fearless, and he was targeted by the forces of secrecy and ultimately driven out of his own organization, NICAP.
Yes.
It's one of those things, Tracy, that it's really worth anybody's time that have the opportunity to go back and examine that period, because I really think from 1947 through about 1953, 54, that was the golden age of research. That was before the forces of secrecy, the military the Central Intelligence Agency really clamped down. You know, the period right after the July-August 1952 overflights of Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Well, you know what? We hang on to that thought. We are right now at the break time. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight my very special guest, Mr. Tracy Torme, is joining us once again. And I got to say, it's always a delight when Tracy comes on. And we've got a heck of a lot more in the wings, so stick around. We'll be back.
I'm getting older and noticing that my body just doesn't work as well as it used to. So I like to keep fit as possible by hitting the gym a few times a week. Recently, I started having a nagging bicep pain, and it got so bad I couldn't even lift the weights. When I was complaining about it to a friend, he told me about Angioprim. He said chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in veins and arteries that may cause blockages. You know, after just 1 week of taking Angioprim, the pain was gone, and now I'm back in the gym full strength. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in Angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. So to learn more, go to angioprim.com. That's ANGIOPRIM.com, or talk to a trained consultant. Call Angioprim toll free at 945-882-7221. You'll feel better with more energy. That's 945-882-7221. Or go to the website angioprim.com.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied, but you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with, you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
Permanent industrial glue impossible to remove? Not anymore, because Handyman Formula by D-Bond is a patented chemical adhesive remover. It's used in the building and home maintenance industry, but now it's available for your home use, for your DIY projects. Unglue stickers, silicone rubber, labels, price tags, flex tape, weather stripping, carpet glue, wood glue, liquid nails, even 3M 5200. And it dissolves graffiti. Yeah, graffiti. Handyman Formula by D-Bond works, and it's safe to use on most surfaces. No need to call a professional. Don't get out the pliers and blowtorch. Just apply a little Handyman Formula by D-Bond and wait 90 seconds, then quickly and easily pull the items apart. Get unstuck. Visit DBondHandymanFormula.com. That's DBondHandymanFormula.com, or call 561-575-4200. Handyman Formula by D-Bond.
More ways for you to make contact. Live Discord chat rooms, live talk radio, live video cast, toll-free HD phones, and coming this year, live streaming TV, giving you more ways to make contact. Your KGRARadio.com.
And we're back with Mr. Tracy Torme. Tracy, before we went to break, we were talking about the years that J. Allen Hynek was working as a consultant for the United States Air Force. Now, during that time, the Air Force, for anyone that was paying attention or is familiar with that era, were absolutely stone cold crazy when it came to the topic of unidentified flying objects. They went to extraordinary lengths to try to dismiss the entire phenomenon as delusional, as hoaxes, etc. And of course, anyone that truly paid attention, especially witnesses in the armed forces of the United States, in cases that came over here from overseas, police officers, civilians, all across the board knew something was going on. And almost to the end of Project Blue Book, the Air Force denied. Now, in the last 3 years, things have changed dramatically with the release of several videos by the United States Navy. Former extremely highly placed government officials have come forward talking about the phenomenon, not the least of which was Senator Harry. As a matter of fact, you just recently spoke to him, didn't you?
Yes.
Harry Reid.
When I found out that Harry Reid had been the catalyst for some interesting government admissions about UFOs, I was excited because I have an aunt. She's 92 years old, but she's very lucid. And for those in your audience that knew who my dad was, she's his surviving sister. There were only two of them. And she was a politician in Nevada, pretty prominent one for many years in the Democrat Party. And I knew that she had to have known Harry Reid. That's where he came from. So I was at a wedding in Las Vegas for my cousin. My whole family was there. And lo and behold, there's my 92-year-old aunt, Myrna, and I haven't seen her in a long time. And we sit down and start catching up. And one of the things I said to her was, hey, have you heard what Harry Reid has been doing about UFOs? And I said, you're good friends with him, aren't you? She goes, oh, my God, we go way back. We're good friends. And I said, I'd really love to talk to him. And then other things started to happen at the wedding. And we got separated. And I told my wife later, I said, oh, man, I should have pressed that home a little more with my aunt that I really would love to talk to Harry Reid. And lo and behold, several months after the wedding, I don't know what triggered the memory in her, but she called me and said, here's Harry Reid's number. He's waiting for your call. And I said, really? Does he know what the subject is? She goes, oh, I told him a little bit. And I thought, okay. And I really thought about it for a few days. Did not want to come across to Harry Reid as a UFO nut. So I wanted to approach this very carefully, which I did. And I told him, we had a very nice conversation. And I told him that it was Lou Elizondo that I really wanted to meet, the ex-naval intelligence officer, I guess, who has been, heading this group called ATIP. And so Mr. Reid, Senator Reid, said something to me. He said, well, he had a couple of constituents who had asked him about this subject that he really trusted, and that got him to looking into it. And he actually said to me, Tracy, thousands of people have seen these things, and they're not balloons, and they're not like atmospheric phenomena, but the thing of it is, we don't know exactly what they are. And I thought that was fascinating when he said that, because that's what I've come to believe over the years, that they still don't have the real answers to who's coming here and why, et cetera, et cetera. So Senator Reid ended up putting me in touch with Mr. Elizondo. Within one day, there was a message on my answer phone. Hi, it's Lou Elizondo. And left his number. So I called him, and, you know, it's funny because I've gone on to talk to Lou about Hynek. He was very interested in Hynek, and we discussed it. But all I can say is Lou Elizondo, tremendous gentleman, really humble and straightforward. And I was telling him that he was sort of the seminal figure that Alan Hynek and I used to hope would come along one day, would pierce the veil of, you know, UFO secrecy. And Lou, in the typical way that he is, said, "Oh, no, I'm just Lou. I'm not doing anything that special. And if I am, it's because of my team. It's not because of me." And we started to have a really good friendship. We talked that first time for about an hour and a half. And I really am excited to say that I believe that Elizondo's group is going to work very hard, and he's already doing it, to tell not only the United States, but the entire world.
Well, you know, Tracy, I wanted to interject something here. And before we got sidetracked with Senator Reid, what I was wanting to say was that I found it astounding. Now, I know you probably do understand that when I look at all of this, I look at from the aspect of an investigator. I mean, hell, I was a criminal investigator, and all of this stuff just automatically I start sorting it and going over the certain facts, going over incidents, etc. And I try to look at this as logically as if I were investigating a homicide, for example. Okay. Now, I found it amazing that in the last 3 years, as this topic has opened up quite a bit, that the one military organization that we have heard absolutely nothing from was the original military organization that was involved in this from the beginning, back in 1947, the United States Air Force. The Navy, the United States. Now, incidentally, I will also say that in the early 50s, there was quite a bit of contention. And I'll tell you a little story about the Air Force and the Navy. There was quite a bit of contention between the Navy and the Air Force because around 1951, 52, somewhere in that time frame, and I'm going strictly from memory right now, and I got the original reports from the written records of Major Don Kehoe, who headed up NICAP. The Navy Secretary was on a fact-finding mission in Hawaii. Okay, this is in the early 50s. This is years after the end of World War II. And they were flying the Navy Secretary back to Washington, D.C. when his aircraft was buzzed by a flying saucer, a UFO. And of course, the air crew, the Navy Secretary, everybody on board were absolutely astounded and amazed by this. They got back to D.C. The Navy Secretary immediately got in touch with the Secretary of the Air Force. And you know what the Air Force told him? We can't tell you anything you don't have a need to know.
Oh, God.
Well, buddy, let me tell you what, that lit some fires, and anybody that knows anything about the Navy and Navy intelligence especially, okay, would know that that's not the right way to go about dealing with the Secretary of the United States Navy. So the U.S. Navy began their own investigation. Now, within the last 3 years, the U.S. Navy has released those videos of the UAPs, the so-called Tic Tacs, the film from their F-18 fighter jets chasing these things and so forth. And the Navy went on record admitting publicly that they have no idea what these things are. And during all of this, has anybody heard as much as a peep from the Air Force? Now, I got to tell you, Tracy, I find that highly, highly suspect.
Well, the Navy also allowed their pilots to go and do interviews with the news media about these things. That's such a change in attitude, Don. I mean, you know that so well. And that's actually something that I've talked to Lou about, and he's also somewhat puzzled by it. He thinks that the reason is that the Air Force has spent so many years denying the existence that I think there's a ridicule or an embarrassment factor involved where they're dragging their feet and they still won't join the Navy. But thank goodness the Navy is doing what they're doing. Also, I wanted to comment on something you mentioned earlier, and that was the multiple sightings in that one basically week of time in Washington, D.C. I believe it was 1953. I personally think that had an incredible effect on the future of, reporting UFOs, because in 1953, for those in your audience that might not know this, it was known in UFO circles as the Washington, D.C. invasion.
Yeah, that was actually, Tracy, that was actually 52. Harry Truman was still in the White House. Dwight Eisenhower took over in January of 53, and that was the time that the CIA convened the Robertson panel.
Right, and what's interesting is the Washington, D.C. invasion, there were fleets of UFOs that were supposedly seen over the city. It wasn't just like a sighting here and there. It really shook up the government because they were under tremendous pressure, Don, to explain these things now that they were appearing over the Capitol, and it seemed like there was nothing we could do to stop it. So I believe that, I've looked into this, I believe that two factions basically came to prominence after the D.C. invasion. One was a group of people or people in power that said these UFOs are just a space-age myth, they're silly, they're nonsense, and a year or two from now, people won't even remember the word flying saucer. It's all going to disappear. The other faction said, no, I believe the government knows exactly what these things are, and they're going to release the truth to the public soon, and everyone will know what the government knows. The great ironic thing that I've come to believe is that both of those factions were wrong, because neither of those things happened. UFOs didn't suddenly stop being reported. And on the other hand, the government never made this great announcement back in the early 50s. And I think that, Don and you and I have talked about this, my own personal theory, which I've developed, pretty recently over the last 10 or 20 years. I think the great irony is that if you went to the government and were able to get into their files and see what they really have, there must be some great photographs, there must be some great pieces of footage, but as far as knowing what these things are, where they're coming from, why they're here, things like that. I personally believe they still don't know. And
Well, I've got a little inside story about the Washington D.C. invasion. Okay, now that everybody thinks that happened over a period of 2 weeks, latter July and early August. Actually, there were 3 weekends that these UFOs appeared over the nation's capital, the White House, in restricted airspace all through the Washington, D.C. area. Now, in January of 1995, I was then doing my first radio show weekly on CRN, the cable radio network. And on, I believe, if I'm remembering, it was around the 25th or so of January, I had on again as a guest Philip Klass. Now, Phil Klass, ladies and gentlemen, you may have heard his name, you may not be real familiar with him, but going back to the 60s, the latter 1960s, every time there was a UFO case, Phil Klass was who the media went to explain it away. Phil was the arch skeptic of all the skeptics. He was a senior editor with Aviation Week and Space Technology. As a matter of fact, Tracy, do you know that during the this is just a little segue, during the 1990 MUFON Symposium that took place in Pensacola, Florida, Vicki and I had gotten down there. We had flown down to Pensacola, and MUFON always has like a Friday evening get-together where, you know, all the participants, all the attendees, etc., meet together, usually in a cocktail lounge, bar, restaurant, whatever. And I, of course, by then, I knew Klass. I saw Phil sitting at a table, and he was a short little man. He was not tall. He might have been, I don't know, 5'3", maybe 5'4", if he was wearing his platform shoes. At that time, he was in his mid to late 60s, and Phil smoked like a chimney, okay? He always had a Marlboro cigarette going. He'd smoke one down to the nubbin, you know, grind it out, pull another one out, and fire it up. And we're sitting at a table, and we're just chatting. We're having a very nice chat. And on a personal level, I got to say, Klass was a very congenial guy on a personal level. However, when it came to UFOs, he was a sneaky, behind-the-scenes, backstabbing son of a bitch, okay? So, at any rate, we're sitting there, and this 6'5" drunk, and I mean, this guy was big. And, you know, hey, I was a cop for years. I looked at him and I knew trouble was a coming. And he came up to our table, and it was just Phil and I sitting there. And he got into Klass's face. Now, here's Phil, all 5'3" or 4, okay, sitting there, and he's cringing. This guy is 30 years, you know, younger than Klass. He's drunk, and he's getting mean. So I knew I had to do something. So I stood up. I'm a big guy. You'll attest to that, Tracy. Yeah. And I shoved this guy back, and I said, hey, I said, we're in a goddamn public arena here, okay? I said, this man's not bothering you. Do yourself a favor, pal. Take a walk. And he looked at me, and he turned around, and he wandered off. Then I sat back down, and I said, hey, Phil. Yeah? I said, you know I just saved your ass, right?
Did he give you credit?
He looked at me. I said, I think you should buy me a drink, Phil. So,
Well, it's ironic because Bill Klass, in many ways, took over for Alan Hynek. I mean, not that they were working together, but he became the number one skeptic.
Well, I wanted to get back to this 52 overflight thing, and Phil. Yeah. So it was around January 25th, and here we are, on my radio shows, cable radio network, UFOs Tonight, hosted by Don Ecker, and we're talking about a bunch of stuff. One of the things we talked about, he tried to push the theory that Mac Brazel, or no, I'm sorry. Major Marcel, right. Major Marcel claimed it was a UFO because he was trying to win a $3,000 award that some newspaper was offering for anybody that could explain UFOs. Now,
I never heard that.
Yeah. So now here's Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer of the most secret military organization on the planet Earth at that time, the 509th, bomber group, the only nuclear-ready bomber group on the planet. And Jesse Marcel's trying to get a $3,000 award. It was pure crap. Yes. So we went from that to the DC overflight. Now, as an incidental, Phil, when I kept interrupting him on his BS, offered to hang up. He said, "Oh, well, if I can't say my piece, I'm going to hang up." I said, "Hey, Phil, I'm just trying to keep you honest." So, we continue on, and then I talk about this case of the 52 overflight. He said, "Well, now, Don, I've got to tell you, if that were true, if they really were UFOs that were coming in from who knows where, the military, the Air Force, they would have had every jet fighter in the world parked around D.C., and they would have..." I said, "Phil, they couldn't." "What do you mean?" I said, "Phil, all those military bases at the time were being resurfaced. They were being resurfaced. The military was putting in new runways and all." "Oh, that's crap." I said, "Phil, I called up and spoke with Al Chop. Do you know who Al Chop was?" Now, yes, Al Chop, ladies and gentlemen, had been the Air Force's civilian consultant for media matters dealing with UFOs at the time. Very famous guy back in the day. And this was about 94, 95 when I actually called Al Chop and talked to him before he passed on. Well, Phil got incensed. He said, "They had to bring in jets." I said, Phil, they brought in jets from Delaware. And by the time the majority of the jets would get over D.C., these things would take off. The jets could only circle for so long, and then they had to go back to Delaware. "That's bullshit." And I said, Phil, I said, "You're on my radio show." "I don't care. That's pure bullshit." I said, "Okay, Phil." I said, and Dwight Schultz was there with me. And Dwight said, "Oh, that's good, Don. We got that on tape." So he ended up hanging up. And that was the last time I ever talked to Phil Klass.
The funny thing is, Don, that when my movie Fire in the Sky came out, Klass suddenly got very energized at putting out, a lot of stuff, trying to, ridicule the film or especially to personally attack Travis Walton.
Well, hold that thought, Tracy, because we are, believe it or not, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to pick up right there when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dark Matters Radio, brought to you by KGRA Radio, your contact point to those dusty corners off in the ether. My guest tonight, Mr. Tracy Torme. And hey, we've got a lot more coming up. Stick around.
Hi, folks. It's troubling times, and fear is pushing emotions, which in turn pushes health the wrong direction. Do you ever get an ache because life is uneasy? Try Life Change Tea at getthetea.com. Life Change Tea works on your digestive tract, helping to move food through quicker and comfortably so your health is spot on. Life Change Tea may not help with world issues, but it will help with your digestive issues. A glass a day helps keep the intruders away. So, change your life today. Log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. If your health game is off, get on by ordering Life Change Tea. Getthetea.com. And while you're on our site, look around at the great non-GMO organic supplements. And if you're a sales shopper, go to our specials page and see what's for you. I've been drinking the tea for 12 years and I'm sure glad for its health benefits. Again, that's getthetea.com. Getthetea.com. The tea that makes you go.
For the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
Hello, this is Commander Cobra of Task Force Griffin, KGR Radio, KGRradio.com. And I need you to be a member like myself of the People's Mosquito and help rebuild and fly this great aircraft. I have 3 friends here today also who are going to ask you the same thing. Consider becoming a member of the People's Mosquito.
Hello, I'm John Lilly. I'm the Managing Director of the People's Mosquito, and I'd like you to donate or support our flying program.
Hi, I'm Ross Sharp. I'm the Director of Engineering of the People's Mosquito, and I'd like you to help us rebuild this magnificent aircraft.
Hi, I'm Bill Ramsey. I'm the Operations Director and Tame Pilot of the People's Mosquito. I need you to join us and become my wingman.
Join all of us and be a supporter of the People's Mosquito program. Thanks.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRARadio.com.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, for hour number 2 with Mr. Tracy Torme. Tracy, you were in the middle of something there. I hated to have to break off, but did you have something you wanted to continue with?
Yeah. Well, since you were talking about Phil Klass, so when Fire in the Sky came out, he got really active at trying to debunk the whole story, and he attacked Travis pretty viciously. And he was really always very nice to me. And I was kind of puzzled because I had known a lot of people over the years that he had been pretty vicious with. And he was vicious about the movie and about Travis, but he was very deferential to me. And I really couldn't figure it out. I think as I've thought back on it over the years, I think it was because of my father. I think he was very, sentimental and respectful toward my father. So I think for that reason, he was letting me off easy. And then I never forget that what he used to do, and this used to happen all the time. It's pretty funny. He would be having an off-the-record conversation with me, and I put the off-the-record in quotes, And every time he would call me, he would say something like, hold on a second. I left the door open. Let me just shut the door. And then obviously he would be taping me in the conversation. And he would be doing it in a clandestine way. And he would come back on the line again, and I could hear that the sound on the phone was totally different, that he had done something to start his tape machine. So he was taping me every time he called me, and he was trying to get me to say something that would, kind of deflate the balloon of the Travis Walton case. And it was kind of funny because I told some friends about it. They said, oh, that's just typical Phil Klass. He's trying to get you on tape so he can say, use it later against you. So that was a bit creepy, and he used to do it every time he called. And he would always claim there was some reason why he had to halt the conversation for a few seconds, and then I could hear him turning his tape machine on.
Well, back in the day, in the early 90s, when John Lear was quite a name in lights dealing with UFO research, and the John Lear paper that he wrote, and so on and so forth. He would do the same thing. He would call people up. He did it to me. He would call me up, and hey, Bubba, this ain't my first rodeo.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, and he would ask me leading questions, and I knew, well, that son of a bitch is taping.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a game. It's a game.
Talking about those early days of UFOs, though, when Hynek was the pariah, you've mentioned NICAP with Major Keogh.
Right.
And the other major organization, as you know, was APRO. Okay?
Yes.
They were based in Arizona, I believe. And that's another figure for anybody that's interested in the early days of UFOs, or the people that were really, fighting against the current to bring the truth out. A great pair of people, Don, I'm sure you'll probably agree with this, were Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And they were credited with being actually the first civilian organization, to investigate the topic, the phenomenon, on record. It was APRO. They were before NICAP. Yeah, and they were the first people to do some books on abductions at a time when it was really looked at, not in a good way.
Crazy,
I'm telling you this because when I was doing Fire in the Sky, I knew that the Lorenzens had interviewed Travis shortly after he'd returned from his experience. So, Jim Lorenzen was dead by then for me, but Coral was still alive and very old and not very healthy. And I called her and wanted to know if she would talk to me about Travis Walton. And she said, okay. And she said, I live in Tucson now, and I can't really travel. But if you're willing to come down here and see me, I'll talk to you. And I had heard from other people in UFO circles that she was the most vicious woman alive, that she was just very unfriendly. And what I discovered was she didn't suffer fools gladly. If she thought you were a fool, she would, tell you to your face. But I spent the whole day with her in Tucson, and she was incredibly nice to me, but also she was a walking encyclopedia on UFOs. I mean, she hadn't forgotten anything. She had every case that would come up. She knew, intimately about it. And for anyone in your audience that is interested in this period of time, when you described, Don, as the golden age, and you're right, I believe, you should find the books that Coral Lorenzen was involved with. she was an amazing, amazing woman.
Well,
And
APRO,
basically forgotten now these days.
yeah, I was going to say APRO was in the middle of so much. Now, today, other than regional groups or whatever, there's really only one national organization that is out there supposedly dealing with the UFO phenomenon. Now, each state, of course, have their own infrastructure. Some states, they really take this seriously. Other states, maybe not so much. I'm not going to point fingers at anybody in particular because I think we all know right now MUFON is going through its own troubles and problems because of various senior people that were in the organization that there's scandals, going on about right now. But Walt Andrus, the guy that originally began the organization of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Organization, was originally part of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
Oh, yes. And by the way, Coral didn't have a good word to say about him.
No. And the reason Coral Lorenzen hated, despised, and loathed, and would not have pissed on Walt Andrus if he caught on fire was because he raided their records and stole a lot of information and names, telephone numbers, and addresses, and then solicited those people that he stole from APRO to begin his organization. Now,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but she used to call him Walt Android. That was the only way she would refer to him. But go ahead. Sorry, guys. Yeah.
Well, you know about Walt Andrus and I, right?
No, tell me.
Well, in 1989, I had completed a paper of research. I was already medically retired from law enforcement, okay? And I had been injured pretty badly. I had been going through physical therapy. And, I needed something to keep me active. And I had met a guy who was the state director for MUFON in the state of Idaho, where I was living at the time. So his name was Don Mason, great guy, conscientious, And in I think it was 87, he convinced me to join MUFON for a year and made me his state section director. Okay, so I was, in full disclosure, a member of MUFON for 1 year. Now, Mason was a real go-getter, and he wanted to really get a viable, moving organization in Idaho, and he also wanted to be able to connect and send information back and forth with, surrounding states, the MUFON infrastructure in states like Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, etc., right? So there was no directory that MUFON had available to have these folks be able to connect with each other. So Don Mason called up Walt Andrus, and Andrus was living in Texas then, and told him what he wanted to do, and Andrus just cut him off at the nubbins. He said, no, I'm not giving out any information. And I got to say, that really ticked off Don Mason. He was very upset about that. And, he would get reports and things. He would send them down to MUFON, and they just would go into a black hole. He never got anything back. And after a while, he got pretty ticked off at that. So after being a member for a year, I saw no future in doing that, continuing on. But in the meantime, I had begun research into mutilations involving human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up writing a paper on that. And I forget where I initially sent it. Later I ended up doing some stuff in UFO Magazine with it after I was the director of research. But anyway, one of the people that read my paper was John Lear. Now, in 1988, 1989, Lear, who was the son of William Lear of Learjet, Lear-Sigler Corporation, when he came out, an airline pilot, when he came out of the shadows, MUFON just about had orgasms all over itself. Here was a guy, that was an airline pilot, had flown under contract for the CIA in Southeast Asia, was the son of Bill Lear of Learjet. I mean, they just really had orgasms. So they offered him the state directorship for his state of Nevada and made him the state director for the state of Nevada. So it just so happened Nevada was hosting that year's symposium, national symposium.
That was the famous symposium where all the hell broke loose, right?
Oh, yes, it was. Oh, you bet it was. Bill Moore, and I mean, there's another little segue we can go off on too. But
you did quite well.
So John Lear called me up, and he said, "Hey, Don," he said, "would you like to come down? And I'm holding and hosting a special speakers thing on Sunday, and present your paper on human mutilations." So I'll be real honest, Tracy. I had to think about that because I didn't know really how much of a hot potato that was. You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
There was a lot to really consider with that, but I finally decided I would do it. So I said, okay. Well, so Lear, puts out his, special speakers section that are going to be speaking on Sunday. So, I get the plane ticket. I fly down to Nevada, go into the hotel, and I walk up to the front desk. And as I walk up to the front desk, and I've got my suitcase, and I've also got a laptop computer I'm carrying, there were three guys standing up there. And one of the guys was an older guy, very short. I had no idea who they were. But I did notice that they all stared at me as I walked up to the desk to check in. So I put my stuff down, and the hotel clerk comes over, and I said, "Oh, you have a reservation for me. My name is Don Ecker." So, he goes and he checks. And this short guy walks up to me. And he said, "Are you Don Ecker?" And I said, "Yes." And I looked at him. He said, "Well, I'm Walt Andrus, the international director of MUFON." Okay, like I'm a moron, I guess, that I didn't know who Walt Andrus was. And I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, I just want you to know that if you speak at John Lear's Sunday special, you will never speak at another MUFON, symposium ever again."
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay. So, as if that was going to scare me off. I guess that's what he thought he would do.
Yeah.
So I ended up speaking at it, but yeah, you're right. That weekend is infamous in what happened with, the Friday night, Bill Moore admission that he had been working hand in glove with military intelligence, admitting that he disinformed UFO researchers, i.e., Paul Benowitz, who was literally driven into a mental hospital by the shenanigans these clowns pulled on him. That was a very, very hot night.
What conclusion did you come to about who was behind the mutilation?
I'm sorry, Tracy. Say that again, please.
I said, what conclusions did you come to about who was behind the human mutilations?
Well, officially, I got to tell you, I've never come to any conclusions. Now, if you're talking about speculation, okay.
Yeah, speculation. Yeah.
I can speculate.
Okay.
I think something behind the phenomenon was involved 100% with the people that were killed and mutilated. Now, that's pretty inflammatory. Okay, could I prove that in a court of law? No, I could not. And I always go by that criteria. You know, what could I prove if I were called into court and put under oath and interviewed? I couldn't specifically point to anything, but my speculation always has been, after going through the cases I went through for 3 years, I beat my head on a wall trying to get through this stuff, and it was impossible.
That must have been very creepy, just exploring that area. I mean, it's such a creepy area. I mean, I would have wondered if it gave you nightmares.
Well, I'll tell you, I had gone. Now this is after I was medically retired, right? I had gone to several buddies of mine who were still active duty law enforcement. One was a detective with the Boise PD. Another was an investigator with a sheriff's department. And then another guy I knew back in Ohio was a cop. And I knew him through CompuServe because he also had an interest in the UFO phenomenon. So when I was trying to get through all this stuff, I called up my buddy at the Boise PD and I said, look, this is what I'm working on. Now, he was very familiar with cattle mutilation. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, so was my buddy at the sheriff's department. Okay, these were all things that they had, either come across or in some cases been involved in active investigations. So with that in mind, it really wasn't that much of a stretch to think that the human equation might have figured in there somewhere, right? Mm. So I said, this is what I would ask you if you're willing to do it. Okay. Send an inquiry back to the NCIC in Washington, okay, the database, which is maintained by the FBI, with this search criteria. And the search criteria involved human deaths, purportedly homicides, where the bodies were mutilated in certain ways. And you know what I'm talking about. Sexual organs, anus, eyeball, that type of thing. And I gave them a 5-year period to plug into that. And let me see, what else? Now, I knew that in that part of the country, okay, which was the Northwest, that the Green River Killer, the serial killer, you remember that guy?
Absolutely.
That murdered all the mostly prostitutes and mutilated them.
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
I figured a hell of a lot of those cases would have popped up. okay, which I would have to root through. But my buddy at the Boise PD got back to me. I figured I wouldn't hear from him for at least a week or so. He got back to me within, I think it was like 2.5 days. And he called me up at home and he said, "Hey, what the hell did you get me involved in?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" So he said, "Man," he said, "I got called in by my lieutenant and he was reading me the riot act about this." He said, "What the hell is this?" So I said, "So what happened?" He said, "Well," he said, "apparently your inquiry that I submitted put up red flags all over the damn place." Now, the same thing happened with my buddy with the sheriff's department. Now, not quite to that extent, but by then, whoever back in D.C. knew somebody was looking. So they shut that down real quick. Now, a couple of weeks later, one day I get a call in the afternoon at home. Okay, now I was going to some college classes at the time, and it was either right before I was going to leave or right after I got back. I don't remember now. But this guy gets on the phone. He identified himself, and he was a DEA agent in Florida. Now, I'm thinking, what in the hell would a DEA guy be calling me up for, right?
Yeah.
And he said, "Well," he said, I read your paper that you wrote." And I said, "Well, where'd you read it?" And he read it. He read it off of some BBS, I think, a bulletin board service. And he said, "I got to tell you, man," he said, "I thought you were full of it, but I did a little checking. And he said, maybe you're not full of it, but I'm just going to give you a little advice." And he said, "It's up to you whether you take it or not, but basically, if I were you, I'd step away from this and I'd forget I ever even came across it, because," he said, "you don't know it, but you could be getting yourself in some deep kimchi." And I said, "Oh."
Do you think he knew something, or he was just whistling in the dark at that?
No, I think he might have talked to some people that told him that this was not a good place to go.
Well, that's I used the word creepy a little while ago, but it is creepy when you think about it, because if there's something really sinister behind it, and how could there not be, given what it was, it makes you wonder. Again, it's cattle mutilations are creepy enough, but human mutilations, that's one step further, don't you think, Don?
Well, that's more than one step. Yeah, I do think. Hey, but I'm looking at the clock here. We don't have that much longer to go. One thing I definitely wanted to query you about: the film that you originally were part of, which the working title was 701. Okay, and for all you folks out there wondering what 701 is, well, Tracy actually addressed it earlier. That was the number of cases in Blue Book officially that were never solved by the Blue Book investigations. But Tracy was involved with a film that went through a lot of twists and turns and problems and so forth, with filmmaker also James Fox. Now, Tracy is no longer a part of that. Tracy, that film is supposed to come out in a few days. Do you have any thoughts or anything about that you want to share?
Well, the film will still say a film by me and James Fox at the top of the titles. It'll also list me as a producer. And so I'm not completely disengaged from it. But, yeah, it went through a million permutations. It all started when I had a conversation with James Fox where I very clearly said that I was not interested in working on yet another, UFO documentary on television. That I felt there'd been a million of them, and I thought that it was oversaturated. But I said, if you're interested in making a feature film of this, I'd be interested in doing it with you. So we went down the road to 701, and a whole bunch of things delayed the completion of the film. And ultimately, I came to believe that James Fox had done a documentary called Out of the Blue, and he had discussed with me many times his frustration at never having enough money to do the film that he wanted to do. He'd always had to compromise it. And I started to suspect that he wanted to do sort of, I'm stuck Out of the Blue. He did I Know What I Saw. That was the film. He'd done both of those, actually. And he had lamented that he hadn't had the proper budget. So I started to suspect that he really wanted to do I Know What I Saw Part 2, which I was never interested in doing at all. And so we started to drift apart. He wanted to do this as a documentary, 701, and I had wanted to do it as a feature film that would differentiate itself from the other TV documentaries. So what complicated things, Fox had a real falling out with one of the major producers on our film. And ultimately, I found out, much to my surprise, that I needed triple bypass surgery. And when I went in for the surgery, my partner on 701 basically hijacked the film to the point where when I came out of my surgery, I was, sort of on the outside looking in to this film, which I had started. And so what it's become since then, I certainly don't lay claim to. It'll have my name on the credits, but it's become, basically, in my opinion, I Know What I Saw Part 2, which I had repeatedly said I'm not interested in doing, because I think those waters have been overfished, if you know what I mean. So that's what's coming out now. I was a part of it for a long time, but I don't feel connected to it anymore, other than my name will be on the credits. And very sad what happened.
Well, now this is going to be strictly a streaming film, correct? I mean, it's not opening up in theaters anywhere.
It was supposed to until the COVID virus, and that's the excuse that I've heard for why it's now only a streaming film. One day, after all the dust has settled, I'll speak even more openly about how the film was hijacked. It's sad, but I think it's coming out under what I think is an extremely stupid title, The Phenomenon. And that's, yeah, I think it's coming out later this month.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I were not mistaken, I thought you had a problem with the name change on that.
Oh yes, I certainly did. I thought 701 was a really clever title. It had a lot of irony in it, because it actually is the number of unexplained cases, and you and I know, Don, that there were many more than that, but that's the number they put out. So I love that title. And then Fox didn't want any connection with some of these other producers that had worked on 701. So he decided that we needed to change the title. And as an example of how my relationship with him had deteriorated, I went off on my own and I came up with 15 alternate titles, a lot of which I thought were very good. I'm sorry, guys. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I dropped my phone for a second. I personally liked one that was Paradox Above Us, since it was about the UFO phenomena. And all of my alternate titles were just immediately dismissed. And Fox went down and found The Phenomenon, which I thought was mind-wrenchingly stupid. I said, if you're going to use that title, at least just call it Phenomenon. Don't say The Phenomenon. But he wouldn't even listen to that. So I just washed my hands of this whole thing ultimately. I don't know whether the film that's coming out is going to be any good at all. I know there were a lot of interviews with UFO people that I was involved in that were good interviews, and it may make for a good film, but
I was one of them.
I have my doubts. Yeah, that's right.
Did I get left on the cutting room floor, Tracy? Do you know?
Oh, given Fox, I would really doubt it. Since anybody that had any connection with me, he basically, I think, cut out of the film. So I think you're not going to make it. I could be wrong. Yeah. But
as a matter of fact, the day you interviewed me, Don Schmidt was over there.
Yeah, Don was the producer on the project. He got screwed over too, like many people did, and I'm just sorry about it. A lot of the reason it happened was because I had to go through that heart surgery, and it took me out of the project for quite a while, and it's sad, but that's what happened. So,
well, I don't want to give you another episode, so let's do this. Let us let us change horses, even though we're in the middle of the stream. Since you've made connections with Lou Elizondo, I can recall when Unidentified first aired, the first year, you and I talked. I asked you, hey, Tracy, have you been watching this new series on the History Channel? And I can remember we were talking quite a bit about that. And, ever since that first aired, I got to say, I've been doing a lot of deep thinking about it. Now, Tracy, you know that when I was the director of research for UFO Magazine, I interfaced with everybody. NASA, the government, the military, professional skeptics, you name it, and at one point or another, I talked to them. Astronauts, remote viewers, other researchers. I mean, hell, I was doing the entire gauntlet. Now, the one thing that I always found to be ironclad fact was that anybody within the United States government, no matter what level, were bound to basically dismiss this phenomenon from the get-go. Two cases that I broke in the television news, television programming was the STS-48 case and the Phobos 2 Russian probe case. Now, with Phobos 2, I ended up submitting a story for Omni magazine back in those days, and that was a very prestigious magazine at the time, since it's been out of business for years. But I really pulled out all the stops on that case. Now, it involved Secretary General Gorbachev, President George H.W. Bush, the Russian probe itself, Phobos, the NASA link to the whole series of events, the fact that all the Russian telemetry was being fed back through NASA facilities before it went to Russia. I mean, there's a hell of a lot about that nobody today has a clue about. So, in April of 1991, after the Iron Curtain fell, Russian retired Red Air Force Colonel Dr. Marina Popovich was over here visiting the United States. Now, she passed away several years ago. But this woman was one of the premier female aviators of any country, anywhere, including being a Russian cosmonaut. Her former husband was General Pavel Popovich, who was the first human being to rendezvous with another spacecraft in orbit. Now, I spent a weekend with Marina down in Arizona. I had a chance to interview her extensively. And what was all this about? Well, the fact that their probe, Phobos 2, which had NASA scientific experiments on board, was apparently rammed and destroyed by something up in orbit around Mars. And according to Glav Cosmos, it was a deliberate act. Now, with that being said, this is what I submitted to Omni. So I called up the White House and I spoke with Mr. Marlin Fitzwater, who was George H.W. Bush's press secretary. Do you remember him?
Absolutely, yes.
And of course, I asked him, and this is what I asked him. At the time, it was all over the news. President Bush and Secretary Gorbachev had a clandestine meeting on board Gorbachev's yacht. Okay? Now, the press kerfluffle happened because President Bush went over to his yacht in a small craft in the middle of a great big storm that was going on. And Bush took all kinds of slings and arrows from the press because he put himself at risk. Now, what the hell would he be going over to see Gorbachev for in the middle of this terrible storm? Now, according to Popovich, Dr. Popovich, Marina, he went over to confer with Gorbachev because of the Phobos 2 incident. They were concerned about a third party extraterrestrial that showed aggressiveness and hostility toward an Earth probe. Now, when I asked Fitzwater about it, he, of course, burst out laughing and said there's nothing to it. That's not even close. Okay. But this is what Dr. Marina Popovich told me. And she was in the creme de la creme of former Soviet society. So, what do you do with that?
Now, when that image came out of the thing that supposedly attacked the probe, wasn't it a blurry image of something?
No, it was shot. It was shot in infrared, Tracy. It was the infrared camera on board the probe that took that photograph.
Okay, and what did it show? I'm trying to remember.
Well, according to the Russians, according to Glavcosmos, it was an object that was 25 kilometers in length. That's 15 and a half miles, and a mile in diameter. And according to them, it turned toward the probe and then rammed it. Now, if you're wondering, well, why in the hell would that have been something that they did, if in fact that's what happened? Well, what was not known to many people is that there was an extremely high intensity laser on the Phobos 2 probe. Now, originally, what the plan was for this probe to go in orbit around Phobos, the moon, and fire a series of laser bursts into Phobos to find out what it was made out of. Because originally, and remember, we're talking about 1987, 88, 89, when they launched these, there was a tentative plan for a joint Russian-American cosmonaut-astronaut expedition to Mars. That's what they had planned. So, if in fact there was an extraterrestrial craft out there, maybe they saw the laser as a potential threat directed against them. That's the only thing I could come up with.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that. I haven't ever really looked into that. I know you did a lot of work on that. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, a lot of strange things seem to surround Mars. Certainly the face on Mars was very odd. They've explained it away. I'm not 100% convinced by that explanation that it was just a bunch of rocks.
No. And I'll tell you, I just recently had Dr. John Brandenburg on, who is regarded as one of the premier Mars scientists. And he's the guy that discovered that at least 2 nuclear devices were detonated on Mars.
I know, that's really weird.
Okay, and
really
according to him, there was at one point a civilization on Mars.
Fascinating, really is. I know there's just a probe that went up very recently, right? They just sent another one.
There's more plans. I mean, President Trump has been talking about, sending an expedition to Mars. I don't know any of the particulars about that. I don't know if it could be a joint thing or simply strictly American. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting. Now, the only thing is, am I going to be around to see it? Because we're talking about the 2030 something,
Right. You'll be there. I'm going to make sure you're there watching your TV when that happens. But I've heard Trump mention that a few times. So I think he's, hoping to do that. Whether he will get the money for it, I don't know. And whether he'll be president then, who knows?
Well, the other thing is, before we even go there, Tracy, it would seem to me we've got to get back to the moon.
Yeah, I think they're going to do that. I know he keeps talking about putting the first woman on the moon. That's his thing. So we'll wait and see. Who knows? But you know what? I know Don Trump Jr. keeps mentioning Roswell in public places. Supposedly he's asked his father, what's the story on Roswell? And Donald Trump does not seem particularly interested in UFOs. But in my mind, I'm going to suggest to Elizondo, when I meet with him shortly, that I think Trump would be the perfect person to, pull back the veil on a lot of UFO secrecy if it was appealed to him about his maverick nature. You could be the first president to ever admit to this. I think he might consider it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, if there were any president of the United States that had a pair of cojones to do it, I would think it would be Trump. But I have an audio clip of Senator Barry Goldwater on a radio show. This is 40 years ago, maybe. Mm-hmm. But he was talking about his buddy, General Kurt LeMay. Bomb to the Stone Age LeMay, okay?
Right.
Okay, now, General LeMay headed up the Air Force. I believe he was, at one point, the chief of staff. Mm-hmm. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Barry Goldwater was a major general in the Air Force Reserve.
Okay.
Okay. So he wasn't just a senator. He was also a reserve flag officer, Air Force flag officer. And he was pals with LeMay. Now, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have to get that out, and I'm going to send it to our producer, and some week play that. A lot of people, if you heard about Barry Goldwater, you're not sure really, though, who he was. He was the senior Republican senator in the Senate during his day. In 1964, he ran for president against Lyndon Johnson, which was literally just a very short time after President Kennedy was murdered. Right. And obviously he didn't win, but Goldwater was a fearless guy, and he had a fascination with what in the world is this UFO business. So Goldwater, being who he was and the position he held, heard that the Air Force at Wright-Patterson had a secret room with a bunch of UFO material that the Air Force had picked up along the way, possibly from Roswell, Tracy. As a matter of fact, that's where allegedly the bodies and material was ultimately shipped, was to Wright-Pat. Well, he went to his buddy, Curtis LeMay, and he said, Kurt, look, I've heard some rumors that the Air Force has a place called the Blue Room or something at Wright-Patterson where all this UFO business is being stored. I'd like to go in and see it. Mm-hmm. Well, Goldwater, and this is the part of the interview that still to this day sticks to me. He said LeMay popped his top, began screaming and cursing at Barry Goldwater, and said, not only can you not go in there, I can't even go in there. God damn it, don't ever ask me again. And he said he'd never been talked to like that in his life.
Yeah, that's very suspicious, isn't it? I'm wondering what got him so angry. I mean,
so tell Elizondo about that if he's not aware of it.
Yeah, but that attitude has probably carried over to the modern Air Force.
I'm sure it has.
And that's why they're sitting on the fence. But thank God for the Navy, and thank God for Lou Elizondo.
Well, some of these other stories that have come out over the years, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago. Well, no, I guess it was around the time of the Roswell anniversary. I was contacted at UFO Magazine by a bunch of news programs.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I was on the NBC Nightly News with what's his face, but he wasn't there that night. Brian Williams was hosting the night. That we were all talking about the Air Force Roswell case closed business. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the Air Force, of course, not surprisingly, kept their report out of the hands of reporters until after they made the announcement, because there were a lot of things in that book. If I would have been there and had a chance to peruse that case closed file, I would have had some very, very uncomfortable questions for them. But at any rate, okay, right. I ended up doing I think it was MSNBC before they went, totally off the rails.
Yeah, right.
At 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning. So I had to get up like in the wee hours, got dressed, and they had a car come out, pick me up, take me down to the studios. And guess who I met down there? Who? Jackie Gleason, one of his wives. I forget which one it was. And she was talking about Jackie being taken by President Nixon, picked up by Nixon himself, driven onto an Air Force base down there. I think it was Homestead. And he took him to a certain part of the base where they had a secret facility where he took Gleason in to observe the body of an ET. You've heard that story, right?
I've heard that story. It's a pretty mythical story, yeah.
Yeah, well, according to Gleason's wife, and this is what she said to me, when he came back from that trip, and I guess he was down there to go golfing with his buddy Nixon. Jackie was quite the golfer.
Okay.
Well, she said for the next 2 or 3 weeks, she had to keep peeling him off the walls. Now, his home, it was up in, I guess, upper New York, had a nickname, the Mothership. And do you know what it was designed and built as? A giant UFO.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that he was absolutely fascinated with the topic. So in a way that doesn't totally surprise me, but I've always wondered if that was true. And apparently he was just kind of half obsessed with the subject. It'd be interesting to know what he really knew.
Well, according to his wife, it happened. So I can't imagine, what she would have to gain, because he had already passed on, what she would have to gain by lying about that. But
right. Yeah, you're right there. Yes.
Well, we're down to a minute, Tracy. What do you have coming up, buddy?
Well, I'm going to be meeting with Lou Elizondo for the first time in person very soon. I'm really looking forward to that, meeting his wife and him, and I'm going to take my wife as well. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also, people might not be interested in this, but my all-time hero quarterback was a guy named Brian Sipe. He used to play for the Cleveland Browns.
Right.
And I actually wore his number in high school as an homage to him. We found out that he lived very close to where we moved, my wife and I, and our dogs. And my wife went out, secretly arranged that he's going to be coming over for lunch
Well, buddy, let me know how that turns out. I think that is fantastic. And Tracy, we're out of time, buddy. Hey,
okay,
look,
buddy.
This has been fantastic, as always, having you come on. Come back again soon. I'm sure you and I will be chatting in the real near future. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for tonight. Have a wonderful weekend. Keep safe. Don't get sick. And next Friday, Dr. Kevin Randall is going to be joining us right here on DMR with some exciting new news. That's it for tonight. Keep your eyes pointed up, your ear to the ground, and we'll see you next time. Good night, all.